Hey everybody, this is Javier. I got Jordan Ramirez with me, one of the movie critics. We're gonna talk
Mm-hmm.
about a movie called They Live. They Live was made by They Live is made by John Carter, who also
Carpenter.
happens John Carpenter. It's also
Yes.
made by Roddy Piper, Keith Davis, as well as Megan Foster.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very crazy movie, one of the 80s that conjured up.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts about this movie?
Okay, so my thought about this film was that it was very straightforward. It was a very straightforward attack on Reaganomics and the Reagan administration, and it was Carpenter's version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, basically. That you could have aliens that could pose as, normal one percenters or wealthy people, but they're actually just using that as a way to basically manipulate and turn, ordinary Americans against one another. So I thought it was a very clever political horror movie that he made, but I thought it was also one of I think his most underrated films uh that now has entered the political and pop culture lexicon.
It has a lot of desires. It has a lot of like personal behaviors, people's manipulation. Like
Hmm.
it makes you kind of like wonder a little bit more now that we have like social media and all these other things going on around us.
Hmm. Well, yeah, absolutely. Because because the film, when it was made in that period, I think it sort of became a prescient factor in the fact that you have not only you have aliens that are basically designed or basically coming to planet Earth to use the planet and the United States as a sort of dumping ground, but they're portrayed in the film as I mentioned, like the wealthy that are like getting promotions, they're getting, like big raises, they're sort of running uh for whatever office they're running, and it's crazy, yes, but it's a pretty interesting take on it. So I don't know. I thought it was a pretty interesting take on what was going on in that period that is a reflection of today. But yeah, as you said, with social media, with what's going on regarding people who are being taken in, it does, yeah, it does feel like it's sort of fit into that bubble. And I understand when it comes to influencers or when it comes to people who are trying to influence whatever topic or like politics or pop culture or anything like that. It feels like it could be like that person could be somebody who looks like they are somebody that they pretend to be, but they're not. It's all a facade, basically, which I thought it could be summed up in this way. But yes.
I mean, I really like how they use the aliens, how
Hmm.
they use aliens and media to control everything.
Yeah, and also the fact that uh in the film that what I thought was pretty interesting were the revolutionaries trying to get the message out there that there have been a lot of, excess, that there have been a lot of things regarding, like commercials or TV shows or things that are meant to sedate one another, and that they are really just there to make us feel this way, to make us feel like we're given into this artificiality, especially through the sunglasses that are meant to just display a single word or a single phrase that it's very straightforward. It's not meant to make you think or anything. It's just meant to say one thing, and that's one thing only, which I thought was pretty spot on as a film from that decade.
I actually do like how gritty they actually made it feel and look.
Hmm.
They really
Uh,
just gave it. a noir feeling. They actually made it like, it's like black and white. It
Hmm.
really is. It really is like a lot of like black and white, where you see one and then you see another.
Yeah. Through the sunglasses and taking them off, and you're seeing like everything uh that is in color, and then when you see black and white, it's just like it's almost like it's very literal. It's not supposed to be like something like that. But yeah, I do love the grittiness of it, and I also do like that the film, now that I think about it, it does sort of have a comic book or comic book like feel, because when I saw an interview with John Carpenter saying that he got the inspiration for this film from a short story that was later adapted into comic book form, and they showed like some pictures of the actual comic. And now that I looked at it, some of the pictures in John Carpenter's film, it does sort of have a comic book feel now that I think about it after watching that movie.
You think so?
I mean, it does. I mean, it does have a sort of comic strip, comic book like from 50s or 1960s feel, even though it's set in the 1980s decade. That's how I pictured it.
I mean, it actually has like a lot of those different things put into it if you really, because like it's, well, part of the movie is like it's aliens, part of
Yeah.
it is like political,
Hmm.
and part of it is supposed to be like a horror movie.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it could be like that as well. Horror, science fiction, politics, taking ideas from science from like movies that are supposed to reflect consumer culture. But yeah, I do think it does have that feel, like the idea of aliens that are uh well, the design of the aliens I thought was pretty interesting as well, because when you see them with the sunglasses and later they had the contact lenses on, they almost looked skeletal like, with those bulging eyes, those skeletal teeth, and they almost almost like uh really melted, almost skin-like structure that I thought they're not really that uh I would say that the makeup as well as the design of it, I thought was pretty interesting, because they did look pretty interestingly terrifying as I saw them in the as I saw them with the sunglasses on, like just
Is
the
that your first
voice.
time watching the movie?
Yeah, say it again.
Is that your first time watching this movie?
No, I've seen it before, but this is my second time watching it again. But yeah, I did find the appearance of the alien-like creatures to be sort of a mixture of both disturbance and a little bit of sort of humor, just because of the way they were looked, but also the voices coming out of these creatures that are meant to sound human, but they don't sound human at all.
I like how we just got to see them throughout the entire movie, just try to live a normal life.
Yes,
Other aliens, even though they're invading the world, and
yeah, and they're shopping, they're shopping, they're talking with people, they're going to the stores, they're getting promotions, they're on television. One of them is like the president of the United States, and so on and so forth. And I don't know, it's sort of bizarre to see them interacting even though they're supposed to be like frightening creatures in the movie. Uh, which I thought was the actual point of what I thought was pretty interesting as I watched it.
I don't know exactly like how they came up with the way they did to make them look like that. I just had to like
Um,
that it was like the 80s, and that's just kind of what they did.
yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in special effects or makeup. I wish I was, but I wasn't. But I always thought that the alien creatures in the film, as I watched it, I don't know, they looked sort of like I mentioned they had a skeletal look, even though they have hair, they wear clothing, some of them wear clothing. Uh and I don't know. the appearance of them, either I thought was, one would say it's a bit comical to look at it, but I would say it's a little bit of a disturbance to watch them, but with the human voices coming out of their skeletal mouths, I just thought it's pretty interesting. And also the fact that they have these wristwatches that are sort of like these sort of
It's like-
communicators that would, yeah, that they're supposed to look like expensive watches, but they're actually like these sort of teleportation devices that can allow them to communicate to whoever is involved, like either law enforcement or somebody, mostly like law enforcement or somebody like in the military, I guess.
yeah. Well, they're
Mhm.
talking to the people in outer space.
Yeah, or yeah,
Alerts. Like,
yes. Uh, but yeah. So that was one of the things I liked about it as I watched the film. The other I thought was pretty interesting was the casting of I know I didn't grow up during this period because I grew up before I was born before this decade even came. It was like came and went. Roddy Piper or Rowdy
it's
well,
Roddy Piper.
okay, Roddy Piper. I'm not so good with wrestling names.
All
But
right.
yeah, no. I thought he was pretty interesting because he did look like if I mean, one would say his acting wasn't that good. I would say no, I just thought he really did a good job with the acting, even if some of the lines may come off as corny or a little bit of a one-sided demeanor. I thought he was good. I thought he was a great actor, even though he was mostly known as a wrestler, to play this character who in the story is named Nada, because in the original story from which the film was based on, he was given the name of George Nada. But I think they just went with Nada, like he was nothing, which I
Yeah.
thought was yeah, which I thought was pretty interesting. But I like that, as Carpenter said in an interview, that he came up with these ideas of what lines he wanted to say or how he wanted to say it. Certain lines in the film that I thought were pretty interesting, that he just let him do whatever he wanted, but also let him be the character, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Well, you know the iconic line for that movie, right?
Yes, I have come here to chew bubble gum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubble gum. Yes,
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 exactly.
yes,
That's why we come to the movies. Like,
yes. Very much so. His that was like one of his lines. One of my favorite lines, it's not from him, but it's said by this other actor, not Keith David, George Buck Flower, who in the film was so was like living this sort of like he was like this bearded man, but he always was flipping the television set. And you see him later in the movie when when Roddy Piper and Keith David's character they end up going to what looks like this big fundraising or big dinner party, and George Buck Flower, who plays this really impoverished man, now he's dressed up and he looks like a well-dressed man. And there's a line that he says later in the film which I thought sort of summed up the movie, in which he says, we all what's wrong with where's the threat from within? We all sell out every day. What's wrong with that? Which I thought was sort of like summing up sort of the movie. But that's one of my other favorite lines that is sort of overlooked. But yeah, uh, I just thought I would mention George Buckflower and also a little bit of Keith David. But I thought he was good in that movie too. Keith David, one of the most well-known actors of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and now. Uh, I grew up around the time that Keith David was the voice in the Gargoyles TV series that came out on the Disney Channel, and later he did another film for Disney called The Princess and the Frog, and he later did Coraline, and he did all these sorts of movies and TV shows, and especially horror as well.
yeah, I mean, well, you know him as Goliath. He is Goliath.
Yes, he is Goliath, the gargoyle from the series. Uh, which was, as I mentioned, it was sort of the early 90s that I was born, but I didn't watch that show until much later, like maybe late 90s, early 2000s when they had him on reruns on the Disney Channel.
Oh, you know, that show is so good. That show was so ahead of its time.
Hmm.
You know,
It
it was in the same ballpark as Batman,
it
like
it
the
was.
original animated series Batman.
Yeah, it came around the same time, but yeah, I understand where it's going with this. And then of course there was Meg Foster. I only remembered seeing Meg Foster in a couple of B movies, but originally I thought she was an interesting character in this picture because I never because she was very mysterious. You didn't know whether she was going to be the good person or the bad person. She didn't reveal too much of her cards, except for that one time, except for the one scene where he goes into her house and he tries to convince her to put on these sunglasses, which I thought she could have been convinced, but then again, she wasn't.
Yeah, she didn't
Uh,
want to do that. She didn't want to do that.
no. And then she comes up later in the film, a little bit later in the film, and you think, oh, she was convinced. And then a little bit, well, it's like you don't know where she goes because, as I said, she's a very mysterious character. Like you don't know what her true intentions are, which is what I thought was pretty interesting about her performance in the picture.
Well, you know, there's a fun fact that a lot of people don't know, but when Roddy Piper
Mm-hmm.
and David fought,
Yeah.
they really fought each other. Like
Yes.
really fought each other.
Yeah. uh, it. Oh, you mean that fight sequence that takes place in the alleyway?
Yeah, so the story is they did a fight scene
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't like it. So they
Mm.
slept over it. Roddy Piper and Keith David and John Carpenter and a couple others that
Yeah.
were on, and they didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
So they went back the next day. It was the next day or the day after that.
I think it
And
was
they
the
were
day
like,
after.
yeah, and they were like, we're just gonna have a real fight.
Yeah.
So they
Uh,
really just beat the shit out of each other.
yeah. Yeah. It was. It was as I think John Carpenter put it, it was his version of the fight scene. I might go a little bit on a tangent, but from like some older movie that maybe the audience may not know about. It was like his version of the fight scene between John Wayne and Victor McLaglen from The Quiet American by John Ford. But because I think John Carpenter was a John Wayne fan when he was very younger, and I think that was what was on his mind when he did that fight sequence. Like I would say it was like sort of his homage to a fight scene that he saw many, many years ago, and he thought of putting it in this sequence.
I mean, they did a really good job of that fight scene for really beating
Yeah,
up.
yeah. It was what ended up being used in The Wrestler by Darren Aronofsky.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that scene was used as that scene was spoofed later in Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler. With and the Aronofsky admitted it in an interview. I think around the time that the movie came out, that the scene from They Live was used as an inspiration for his fight sequence that takes place in an alleyway in the movie.
Yeah, maybe. I'll probably have to rewatch that movie.
Yeah. Well, it's his word, not mine. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course.
Hmm.
You
But yeah. Yes.
go ahead.
Uh, yeah. Uh, yeah. So besides that, I would say the other things that I liked about this film of They Live, besides the messaging and also the fact that you had like a big fight scene and you had Roddy Piper. Um, I mean, what else is there to say about this film other than it's an entertaining film that is it's very straightforward in its messaging. It is a political film. It is a horror movie. It is a science fiction film. It is a film that, as Carpenter said, the 80s may have died out, but it doesn't feel like the 80s have ever left. Um, Again, his words, not mine. But I think it's like a film that it's the legacy of it that feels like it's very resonant. It doesn't have, I mean, besides the some people will complain about the acting or the dialogue, which I would say I wouldn't say it's that bad. I would just say it was a movie that was trying to say what it wanted to say, but that's what I can say about this movie.
Well, I would say it's like it's an 80s movie, and that's just what they did in the
Yeah.
80s. You
Yeah,
know,
very
that's just it. It's like it's very 80s-ish.
hmm
Like the John Carpenter movies, like a lot of them have elements of like sci-fi horror and
hmm
even like social structure, so to speak, commentary.
yeah.
Like a lot of his movies have that kind of stuff, and it's been even decades.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty interesting film. I mean, it's in the same, I wouldn't say it's in the same camp as something like Starman, The Thing, or Big Trouble in Little China from 86, or God, what was that movie with oh, Prince of Darkness. That was it. Or Prince of Darkness around that time, I would say.
You know, you had a pretty good list until you added Prince of Darkness to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I mean, he's a very interesting filmmaker, and I understand that when his films were released, they were not that well received by critics, and they were not big hits at the time. But overall, when they were released maybe on home video and later shown on television, they sort of had a following, and they were reappropriated as classics of their own time. Let's put it this way.
Well, I mean, I think it's a classic to begin with. Like it's one of the few movies. It's one of the few movies that you'll see in the theaters once a
Hmm.
year. You may not go watch it.
Yeah.
You'll see advertisements and everything. You'll see people dressed up, and they will dress up. You'll find one or two pictures like Halloween's fixing to come around. I'm sure someone's gonna do it.
Hmm. Uh,
But
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, uh, I have yet to see, In the Mountain of Madness with Sam Neill. This was like the next decade, 1994, around the time that he was making the remake of, oh my God, uh Children of the Village of the Damned, and he also made his sequel to Escape from New York, Escape from LA around that time period. But I don't know if anybody would say that the 90s movies were more interesting, or maybe the 80s or 70s movies that he made were better than his later pictures.
I really gotta say the '80s is the go-to for John Carpenter's.
Hmm. All right.
Like if we
I
were to make like a D or a B list, if we were to make like a B list movies,
hmm
we would have quite a few John Carpenter movies on there.
Yeah. Very, very much so. Well, yeah, I mean, I grew up when computers were becoming sort of the new norm, and there were still a few movies that were going to use practical effects, but it was almost on its way out when the 90s came in and the 2000s were rolling along. But yeah, I think the 80s and maybe the early 90s, in my opinion, would be the last great decade when they had like the usage of practical effects over the use of now what we use digital effects in movies, and now with the approach of artificial intelligence.
You think so? I think there's still going to be people who want like 80 style movies. Like we still get those from time to time.
Yeah, I mean just saying like not the fans is what I'm saying. I meant like the industry as a whole, like the industry that's trying to go in this direction instead of like going to the old school style of practical effects. I mean, I understand that there are filmmakers and fans, maybe like me still, that want practical effects over digital effects, because when I watch movies that they remake movies from the 80s decade or maybe the 90s and they use like CG over digital over practical effects, I feel like it doesn't have the same feel, nor does it have the same aesthetic as the previous decades, which I think yeah, going back to what you're saying is I think something that fans maybe my age are clamoring for.
Well, like I think CGI is not really a problem. Too much CGI is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like minimal amount of CG, I'm okay with it. But if it's like, uh, I know I hate to go off on a tangent, but if it's like something
We got
like,
time. You go on it.
okay, so if it's
That's
some
why we're doing this. That's why we're doing this, bud.
yeah, so if it's something like a Marvel or a DC movie that heavily relies on too many CG effects that that feels so artificially bland and almost feels like it doesn't have the smell or the aesthetic of practical effects over like makeup effects or like the old school like blood and gore effects that had that same feel and aesthetic, that rubbery feeling. Um, I mean, it would have been better. I mean, I like a little bit of CG in movies, oh, versus like the big blockbuster films that use too much CG that feels like it doesn't have that same aesthetic. So yeah, I mean, that's just my tangent on something that I don't like. I'm not saying that I don't like superhero movies. I mean, I like a few of them, but I just think that we've gone to a point where maybe we I think less CG is better than too much CG.
So you're trying to say something like less is more in a sense.
Yeah, like that. I mean, I don't know if you agree with my statement, if less is
Oh, I
more or
do. I agree with you more and more when we keep seeing these super bad superhero movies.
yeah, I mean the last superhero movie I watched was oh my God, well The Flash, the one with that actor who I don't think he could act anymore because his I don't know, something was wrong with him. Um it just got to a point where I just felt like it was so much CG and it felt like it didn't look that good in the effects. It didn't look like it was realistic. It was too much of it just felt like it was unappealing. It was I don't know, it looked sort of grotesque to me as opposed to it's supposed to be realistic.
I think the last superhero movie I saw was Deadpool and Wolverine.
Oh, wait, did that movie use practical effects or a little bit of CG and practical?
Both.
Okay. Because if it
Both.
was, yeah, because if I mean, I'm not saying that I'm against CG. I'm saying that if it's used for something like hiding, if it's like for like hiding puppeteer effects, or maybe like if it's used for a little bit of like blood effects, or maybe a little bit of matte painting like effects, I'm okay with that. But if it's like creating something that's monstrous or that's alien or that's that's big or whatever. I'm like, I would have used an actor or maybe use a little bit of CG to make it look that as if this person is alien-like, as opposed to replacing the actor and just replacing it with something else. I don't know. That's just me in general.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a not only is it a Marvel, it's a Deadpool movie, so it's kind of you kind of know what you're getting into when you walk into the movie theater and it says Deadpool and Wolverine.
Yeah, I mean the last practical effects movie I watched recently was the Beetlejuice sequel.
Did you like
And
that? I liked that movie, actually.
oh, you liked it?
I liked it. I wasn't like, it could have been better. I'm gonna say it could have been better, but
Yeah.
for what it
I mean,
was, I was all right with it.
yeah, I mean, I thought that Tim Burton, as much as he tries his best to stay, with the practical effects over CG, I thought it was pretty good. He was trying to use as many practical effects as he could, even though there was CG in the movie, a little bit of both. But I thought it was really interesting, and I don't know. I just thought it was a pretty wild movie, is how I would put it.
I think we're at the point we kind of do need some CG in the movies when we do, like when you see a sandworm,
Yeah.
that's, what are we really supposed to do? Like,
I mean I thought they did use CG for that sequence, or maybe I'm just thinking it was a little bit of stop motion mixed with CG. I don't know if that was
yeah,
what they
it's
did.
like I remember the original Dune. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Oh, the Dune film
The
from the
the
80s?
original, yeah.
Yeah.
They
Um
use motion capture or they use the
or
what
stop
the heck?
motion. They use stop
Stop
motion
motion.
effects.
Yeah, they use stop
Yeah, they
motion.
they use stop motion effects. I mean, I like the new Dune film. I never saw the recent. I never saw the 80s version of Dune, even though I have a cousin who says she likes that version. Um, I mean, I haven't seen the original version, and I don't care if people say that it's corny or if it's camp or whatever. I mean, you know, it's I don't know if it was a product of its time or there were a lot of things that went on or whatever, but it's pretty interesting.
Well, it's crazy that you say corny and camp, but that's what's coming back right now. That's the
Yeah,
thing that's coming back is corny and campy.
yeah.
Like
I
even in
mean,
the superhero genre.
yeah, I mean, I've grown tired of the superhero genre. If it were subversive, well, I no, I thought the only subversive superhero show that's out there was The Boys on Amazon Prime. I don't know if that would count as superhero or it was just like a dark comic satire
I mean,
about
that's a
superhero.
really good show. Like I wouldn't even put that in the superhero category
Mm,
because I think it's a really, really good show. It's just like it's kind of twisted and dark and
mm-hmm.
like it shows you stuff that superheroes don't aren't supposed to be doing, but they're doing them anyways.
Yeah, I mean, very much in sort of transgressive area. I mean, the last transgressive movie I watched was that mom and dad movie with Nicolas Cage and Selma Blair.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a transgressive movie. It's a horror movie in which the one day that parents kill their own children.
Shit.
Yes. And it's very much in the style of a 70s grindhouse movie, like if it was made in the 70s, but it was made in the 2010s decade.
That sounds about right, actually.
Yeah, it's like if that movie were made in another decade, it could have been greenlit, but it feels like it was made in the 2010s era. It's corny, it's stupid, it's silly, and it's very graphic and violent, but it's funny and sort of bonkers at the same time when you watch this movie.
I think we should review that movie.
Yeah, mom and dad, Nicolas Cage and Selma Blair and Lance Henriksen's in it too.
All right, so we got a few more minutes. Did you want to say anything before we wrap this up?
Other than I thought this was a pretty good time and that I loved enjoying the movie, They Live, which you recommended, and I thought it was a pretty enjoyable movie to watch, even though some of the moments are a little bit corny and some of the moments uh were a little bit like what the fuck type moments that I couldn't believe was that I couldn't believe ever got in this film. But yeah, I'm pretty interested in movies that are outside of the mainstream or movies that are a little bit transgressive or a little bit like movies that went there type moments, but not all the time, just a few times. But I also like movies that have a sort of mainstream flair, something that's funny, that's comedic. But yeah, I like this movie that you recommended, and in the spirit of Halloween, I thought it was a great choice. I mean, I had recommended some others, but maybe for another time we'll discuss that movie I mentioned, Mom and Dad, which it's crazy, it's bonkers, and you just have to see it to believe it.
I think one of my favorite movies that we should review is actually Mom and Dad Save the World.
Oh, the John Lovitz movie.
Yeah, that's so hilarious.
Okay.
That's so
All right.
cheesy
Yeah.
goodness. Gotta like be
Hmm.
reviewed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, The decade that I was born in, the 90s and later the 2000s, it was like the decade where you had like movies that were trying to be serious, but they had a sort of tongue-in-cheek feel. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, now it's like when you try to remake those types of movies, they're trying to portray it as serious instead of campy or somewhat like tongue-in-cheek. I don't know if there's a film like that where it's sort of trying to be tongue-in-cheek or if it's mostly for TV.
I think the closest one I could think of is Cabin in the Woods.
Oh, the one from the 2010s?
I think that has to
Okay.
be like the one that kind of like goes both sides of like horror and comedy.
Yeah, the one film I would have liked to have seen, uh yeah, uh there were a lot of other horror movies that I thought were pretty interesting, that one would not necessarily think of as horror, but I don't know if this would be related to the month of Halloween, would be there was this film from I'll do it real quick because I noticed we have like around 3 minutes left, but it's called
Yeah.
Sick of Myself. It's by the same director of that other Nicolas Cage movie, Dream Scenario. I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
I've never seen that one. You
Oh,
got me
okay.
on the.
Okay, so Sick of Myself, I'll just lay it to you really quick. It's basically about two narcissist lovers. One is a an artist who is into, taking stolen furniture and turning it into art, and the other is taking like poison tablets that have been recalled in Russia and purposely trying to make herself disabled by getting all these rashes, and she has all these blisters that are coming off her face, and yeah, she purposely made herself disabled so that people will like her, and she tries to be an internet celebrity.
That sounds insane. We should.
It
I'm gonna.
is, yeah, but yeah, I watched it, and that guy Christopher Borgli, who directed that movie Dream Scenario, yeah, it's an interesting movie, but as I said, it's pretty fucked up.
No good. We need to see something terrible.
Yes, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Ramirez. We're gonna leave you off, and everything, the descriptions, titles, everything's gonna be in the descriptions. You're gonna be on it. Send me the links, and then we'll make that happen.
Okay, oh, the movie links?
No, your links.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah. No,
my descriptions and
sorry,
title.
sorry about that. Okay, no problem. Thank you, Javier. It was wonderful to be on the podcast.
You're certainly welcome, boss.